all above board. The chief executive of HSBC going into a House of Commons hearing with the law on his side when it comes to the Swiss account he opened for bonus payments and his Panamanian trust. It's been a bad run, though, for the world's second largest bank. The Swiss leaks list of tax dodgers laid bare by major newspapers, including France's Le Monde, and a 17% drop in profits. This countered by claims the UK lenders cleaned up its act since the high-rolling times that led to the 2008 financial crisis. Is that the truth? Are banks no longer rogue? And what does it all say about Britain, with Europe's financial center much slower to prosecute tax dodgers than, say, France or Belgium? Or that boss of HSBC at the time of Swiss leaks who went on to become Prime Minister Cameron's trade secretary? What fallout for Britain, Europe, and the way global finance is run today in the France 24 debate? We're looking at Swiss leaks and the banks. And with us by Skype from an undisclosed location, the whistleblower in the Swiss leaks scandal, Herve Falciani. Many thanks for being with us here on France 24. We also want to welcome Craig Capitis, correspondent at large for Quartz and The Atlantic, and the author of Metal Men, which was about...
It was the first book ever written on this type of corruption, about the world's most wanted white-collar criminal, Mark Rich.
Mark Rich was later pardoned, I believe,
by
Bill Clinton. From London, we'll be joined by Andy Sylvester of the Taxpayers Alliance, but we also want to welcome anti-corruption campaigner Nicholas Wilson, who joins us from Hastings. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Herve Falciani, since last month, when that list was made even bigger than it had been originally, thanks to the investigative journalist work, how's your life been? Herve Falciani, can you hear us? All right, we seem to be having a problem with the sound. We'll try to get through to Herve in a moment. Before we go on, let's talk, Craig Capitis, about what happened today in the Commons. And just to tell you, it started, of course, with an apology. Stuart Gulliver, chief executive, before a select committee of the House of Commons, he recalled at the very outset a long list of misdeeds and heavy fines that stretch back to the 1990s.
Who's doing the apologising here?
I am.
Personally?
As the Group CEO of HSBC.
So you feel personally responsible for this?
I have been the Group Chief Executive since 2011. I have a collective responsibility for the operations of the Group. I have been in the Group for 35 years. I'm responsible for cleaning it up.
I'm responsible for cleaning it up. But he did say the decisions were made in a collegial fashion. There was a lot of verbal jousting.
Well, this is an old story that reappears like a bad canker sore every few years. It's chaotic, it's complex, and the starting point where one has to begin is with a question. And that is his Swiss bank account, controlled by a Panamanian company.
His personal Swiss bank.
His personal Swiss bank account.
Because there, the apology we heard was for the misdeeds of the bank as a whole.
Well, bankers have been doing that since Mark Rich was... They attempted to haul Mark Rich off to the calaboose in the very early 80s. There's nothing new here. What we're hearing are people... this banker is, in essence, apologizing for making a lot of money for his shareholders. Now, was that money made legitimately? We right now don't know, but I think it's important for people to understand this.
Or as part of that apology for the hefty fines that ensued from the U.S. federal authorities.
Well, he paid the fines, he did the time. People, particularly in Britain, don't like folks who make a lot of money. And that's fine. But you have to really understand this, Francois. You have to go from a ground zero, and that ground zero is with Gulliver. Gulliver, who's being lambasted for making all this money, and people are saying he dodged taxes. Where was he domiciled? When this happened? And he was domiciled in Hong Kong, and he paid.
And he's still domiciled.
He's still domiciled there,
even though he lives in Britain.
That is how the law is written. What he has done has been legitimate. If the government...
But is it right? Is it fair?
That's not for me to judge. That's the law. And if the citizenry of England and the EU and the United States is so up in arms in this, they can vote for politicians who will change these laws, which have been in existence, at least in North America and South America, since 1929. In Europe, even longer. They never have done that.
All right, Nicholas Wilson, your thoughts on the apology we heard for HSBC and the non-apology we heard for Mr. Gulliver's own personal account?
Neither of them took responsibility for what happened. And this thing about it's okay because it's legal. I mean, that's just a nonsense. I mean, HSBC Bank benefit from all the tax advantages that we all benefit from: roads, ambulances, fire. You know, everybody that goes to work there pays their local taxes. But the bank benefits from every tax that their employees pay. But these people at the top, they have these incredible situations going through Panama, domiciled in Hong Kong. He's lived in the UK for 20 years, but he's domiciled in Hong Kong. I just thought it was unbelievable.
You thought it was unbelievable. Let's listen, if you will, to what Gulliver told MPs. He said, "I can understand how people can find these arrangements unusual concerning his own personal situation. But there again, when it came to having that trust in Panama, there was no apology."
No, he was also very patronising. I think he said, "I can understand why people find this strange because you're all stupid." I mean, he didn't say that, but that was the effect of what he said. I mean, he's saying you people are not financially sophisticated like me, so you won't understand it, but I can assure you it's all above board. And we're supposed to believe that. I mean, my experience is nothing that HSBC does is above board. So I'm sorry, it was pathetic.
All right, let's listen to that exchange at one point where he explains why he decides to have this offshore account.
Yeah.
So it was purely about privacy. Privacy from colleagues in Hong Kong, privacy from colleagues in Switzerland, and it had no tax purpose whatsoever.
Why did you need privacy from your colleagues in Hong Kong?
I think, well, first of all, in Hong Kong, we had a computer system back in the day that enabled everybody to inquire on staff accounts.
And why should you be exempt from that?
Because I was amongst the highest paid people, and I wish to preserve my privacy from colleagues. Nothing more than that.
Nicholas Wilson, your thoughts on that explanation?
Strange, because the bank is in front of the Treasury Select Committee because it's through Herve's disclosures, it's transpired thousands of people were using their HSBC Swiss accounts for privacy. So here we have the CEO of the bank saying for privacy, he had a Panamanian shell company through which his salary was paid for privacy from his... I mean, I can't denigrate him. I don't know what his tax arrangements are, but I wonder if HMRC are aware of his privacy arrangements and whether they...
Tax authorities in Britain.
Further.
Craig Capitis.
Well, it's pretty difficult not to disagree with what he just said about the history of HSBC. But the fact remains that he was not legally domiciled in the UK. And he could do whatever he wanted to do with that money. The UK does not enforce people to pay taxes who are British citizens, British passport holders, who live outside of the UK. He could do whatever he wanted to do with that.
That makes it okay.
And that's just the way it is. Yes, but the guy may have come across as a pompous buffoon in front of this committee.
But the bank itself doesn't pay its full corporate tax. I mean, the whole culture is to avoid tax.
Correct.
Are we supposed to believe
Correct. I agree with you wholeheartedly. But a study, any close study of the history of these type of shenanigans, which I've been doing for years and wrote a couple of books on, clearly show that the politicians have always been in favor of these sorts of arrangements. If they were not, then laws would have been enacted.
I'd be very interested to know how many MPs are on Herve's list and whether we'll ever hear about it.
As long as, here's how it works. As long as that MP domiciled in the UK is reporting privately his offshore holdings to the UK tax authorities, then he's okay.
All right, but he wouldn't be doing that if he's got it in a private Swiss bank account, would he? That's the whole point of having one.
Let's bring into this conversation now Herve Falciani, the whistleblower in the Swiss Leaks scandal. Thank you for being with us here on France 24. You were working, just to remind viewers, as a systems engineer in Geneva at HSBC Private Bank. You fall upon the list in 2008. You're got, more than 130,000 names in the list. You're arrested in 2009, and then you start cooperating with the French tax authorities. What do you think, first of all, of the way events have unfolded since those major newspapers went public with those lists a month ago?
Well, just to precise simple things, I was never a system engineer. I always been an analyst and never been in contact with sensitive information directly. This is an important point, even if it's not directly related to your question. We have interesting ongoing lawyers discussions, and I think that in one side we can say we have lawyers, and on the other side we have facts. What to me seems really important is to just now try to find a way to change or to improve the controls that are existing
all right, try to find a way to improve those controls. Yeah. I know that right now there's, as we speak, a grilling going on of the tax revenue people in front of that same committee in Parliament. What do you think about the British culture when it comes to all of this?
Well, it's about impunity and equity, in the sense inequity in this case. It's totally unfair just to be only a few to be able to avoid paying tax. We are all agreeing for that. I may, maybe to help to move on in this discussion, I would like to mention that, when you have one legal structure in Panama, most of the time, it is made just to buy real estates in countries where you don't want to pay taxes. And, sorry, I have a bad feedback. So, this to me seems important. It's not no more what is said, but what is unknown that need to be revealed and clearly being part of public awareness. This is unfair to realize that most of the rules of the laws are made just to protect a few of us.
Most of the rules made to protect a few. Let me bring in at this point in our conversation Andy Sylvester of the Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you for being with us here on France 24. Do you agree with what Herve Falciani just said?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt at all that people are angry at the perceived notion that people aren't paying their fair share when they quite evidently are themselves. But I think today was symptomatic of a wider problem. What we saw today was politicians and parliamentarians, particularly, standing there, sitting there, quite self-righteous and shouting at people. Well, let's be honest here. Anybody that can afford an accountant right now is trying to run rings around the British taxman, because the British tax code is out of date, It's too complicated, and it's got loopholes that are easily exploited by people who can afford the right advice. We need to stop having politicians standing there and throwing things at people like HSBC, like Starbucks previously, like Amazon previously, and get around to fixing the system so that British people will again trust in the tax code, and people will then believe that people are paying their fair share.
All right. The idea you're saying is that we need to reform the tax code, but Craig Capitis, again, this is something that's been discussed time and again.
Right. What is being ignited here is something a lot more dangerous. Although I agree with what your other guests are saying. What you're getting into here is the concept of extraterritoriality, in which when one country can enforce and apply its laws within another country. And I want to give you two brief examples of what I mean by this. There's an expression in law: you can beat the rap, but you can't beat the rye. If a 19-year-old American student comes to France and starts drinking wine and makes a YouTube video of this and posts it, when he gets back to the United States, the U.S., in whatever state he might go back with, his overzealous prosecutor could prosecute him for drinking under the age of 21, even though it took place there. Now,
but when it comes to taxes?
Okay, right now in Texas, one of the great criminal defense lawyers, Gerald Goldstein, is defending a bunch of Mexicans in a federal case in which these individuals have been charged with taking money from Mexico, in which was allegedly criminal money, stolen, no tax paid, and putting it in a U.S. bank, right? The Mexicans' government filed a brief with the court which said they didn't steal this money. It's completely legitimate. The U.S. government is still prosecuting because they don't like these people, overzealous prosecutors. This is what goes on here. You have all of these various tax jurisdictions, America being the primary one, trying to enforce their antiquated tax laws in jurisdictions where they have no legal business being, and the laws, the way they're written right now, support that.
All right, tax harmonization obviously needed. We're going to pick up on that point when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. The further fallout from the Swiss leaks scandal this Wednesday. Two top executives from HSBC, the world's second largest bank, facing questions over that list of that long list of names of clients that was leaked in that list of a Swiss private bank. The man who leaked it is with us, Herve Falciani. He is the whistleblower. He's with us from an undisclosed location. Thank you for being back with us. Thanks as well to Craig Capitis, correspondent at large for Quartz and author of Metal Men. From London, Andy Sylvester of the Taxpayers Alliance, and also joining us from Hastings. He's an anti-corruption campaigner, Nicholas Wilson. By the way, these aren't the first apologies by HSBC that we heard this Wednesday. The bank, for instance, putting out full-page ads to say sorry to customers in two British Sunday papers some 10 days ago. There you see that apology as it was printed in the Mail on Sunday. We're getting reactions on Facebook, and it's true that they're not kind to politicians again. Total garbage. How do you question your boss? Bankers run the UK, not politicians. These people asking the questions are all lackeys and work for the same bankers. It's all smoke and mirrors. That's an important question, Craig Capitis, because we've seen the Occupy Wall Street movement. We've seen growing discontent over the haves and the have-nots, the gap widening.
No. It's the have-nots and the have-yachts.
And with remarks like this one, saying the politicians are in it with the bankers, we're seeing a rising tide of populism in Europe. You say that this is a recurring thing. People are talking about tax harmonization. We need to do it. If something's not done, what's going to happen?
It will continue. You know, in a democracy,
will there be political consequences?
Look, in a democracy, the people get what they deserve, and they deserve what they get. They could have, if they believed that these individuals running their countries, were a bunch of bumptious morons out for themselves. Well, they could have voted them out many times, but this never has become an issue. I realize for many of your viewers this is a new story, shock horror, but it's a very old story.
Herve Falciani, let me ask you, when you fall upon the list, you see some of the names there. We've heard about all the different celebrities, politicians. How much would you say does this list sort of ring true when you heard that comment on Facebook that the politicians are in with the bankers? When you look at that, when you think back to who's on that list?
People never been my focus. I would like to react explaining clearly that you don't have way, more than tweaking complex rules or laws. We have very simple way to do audit in a new way, in a new ethical way, with NGOs being part of those audits that are today supposed to control what is ongoing. If we have ethical lines that are shared not only by board of directors but also by NGOs, the same way that they are existing already, it will improve concretely, not having big and very tough discussions on what can be tweaked. No, the big change will be kind of more transparency, controlled transparency, with, of course, chosen and skilled NGOs, but with, these independent eyes in those affairs that are ongoing. If we want to give more reputational value to our politicians, they have to support just basic, well-known from long time ago already, just transparency principles.
So you're saying,
and they are talking about everything else. Sorry.
You're saying you're in it for to reform the system, not to single out people. HSBC claims you tried to sell the stolen data and even traveled to Beirut to do so. How do you react to those claims?
Well, of course, it's absolutely untrue, and it's a good thing. It's a good example, to reveal what is required just to launch an alert. I'm talking about, whistleblower and ethical outlines that are supposedly there to protect whistleblowers. I had to go, indeed, to Lebanon to trigger the alert. And without this, no investigation in Europe would have been possible. But of course, as I started with, this is usual. They don't want to take the responsibility. They don't want just to respond to what we are now, not me, not myself only, presenting in front of everyone.
And do you feel as though the British have been particularly slow? We see there have been many more prosecutions here in France or in Belgium.
But it's really complex for Great Britain to address that issue because it's cultural, it's unknown, it's unknown until now. We needed first to do everything else to have public awareness. And this is fundamental. And that's why I keep insisting on ethical whistleblower outlines. Not the way they exist today, but, an improved way, an improved one. And this is enough. Nothing to have. No. Just with that, we will have a real change.
Nicholas Wilson, is the public awareness there? Are you heartened by what you heard today in the Commons? Do you feel as though this is a turning point?
Well, I was absolutely shocked, actually, because I'm a whistleblower, and I thought it was unbelievable that they referred to Herve, they referred to data theft. I mean, it's shooting the messenger. They've been caught with their fingers in the till, and they're blaming the manufacturer of the till or something. It's just ridiculous. But I think the problem, the general problem, I describe myself as an anti-corruption campaigner, and I think the problem isn't tax specifically, it's the whole culture of the revolving doors. There was a guy, there was a head of the HMRC in the UK, David Hartnett, who did a sweetheart deal with HSBC and then left HMRC and had a plum job at HSBC. It's widely believed that the MI5 in the UK protected Stephen Green from being arrested in America over the money laundering scandal, the Mexican money laundering.
The former boss of HSBC.
Yes, Stephen Green. Last year, the head of MI5, Sir Jonathan Evans, was given a plum job at HSBC, £125,000 for 40 days work a year. That's what's going on. It's the corruption of the revolving doors. To give you a little example, I'm not going to go into my story, but I worked for a firm of solicitors. I reported them to the Solicitors Regulation Authority. It was to do with fraud, HSBC fraud. The SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, covered it up. And at that time, the head of the SRA was a guy called Anthony Townsend. Now, I've since reported it to the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. They colluded with HSBC to cover it up. This was dealt with by the Treasury Select Committee at the last meeting with the FCA. They challenged the FCA about this cut and paste job they did. They basically, when I made this report of fraud, they asked HSBC what to say, and they cut and pasted HSBC's response and sent that to me. And HSBC lied. What HSB actually said to them was 100% untrue, and the FCA just passed it on to me. So if I now want to make a complaint against the FCA, if I want to escalate my complaint, I have to go to the Complaints Commissioner. The Complaints Commissioner is Anthony Townsend, who was the head of the SRA when it was covered up by the SRA. So you go round and round in circles because of this revolving door with all these people at the top going to the... I mean, I think there should be a law that says that nobody can work for regulators if they've worked in the private sector previously and vice versa, because it's just corrupt all the way through.
Craig Capitis?
There's no way any bank or publicly traded institution, financial institution, or private in the world is going to allow an NGO through its doors to do a due diligence.
All right, but maybe not an NGO, but how about an independent regulator? Or an independent auditor in this case?
Well, look, these independent auditors exist. Look what happened in the U.S. this week. Someone brought up with Janet Yellen, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, that perhaps they should audit the Fed, which certainly needs auditing. And she just about had a heart attack while testifying in front of Congress. It is a closed shop. It really... And it is a smelly kettle of fish. I mean, you can smell the sulfur here in the studio. But the only way that it's going to change is through the ballot box. I have seen too many of these instances, reported on too many of these stories, from the source, from Panama, from inside Switzerland, from Hong Kong, from HSBC's old headquarters on the Bund in Shanghai. The only way this is going to change is through the ballot box.
You mentioned the ballot box. There's a general election coming up in the UK. When the story broke on February 10th, the opposition seized on the nomination by Cameron of HSBC's former boss as a trade secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it was in the public domain in September 2010 that HSBC was enabling tax avoidance on an industrial scale. Are we seriously expected to believe that when you made Stephen Green a minister, 4 months later, he had no idea about these allegations?
glad he's brought up the issue of Stephen Green, who is a trade minister in this government. This is the same Stephen Green who Gordon Brown appointed as the head of his Business Advisory Council. This is the same Stephen Green who Labour welcomed as a trade minister into the government. And it's the same Stephen Green who the Shadow Business Secretary, looking a bit coy today, invited on a trade mission as late as 2013.
All right, so
that is one of the most crassly political, disingenuous statements I've ever heard. If you replay that, listen to how Miliband describes these people. He calls it the tax avoidance. Well, tax avoidance is legal. Tax evasion is not. So if you are doing everything in your legal power to avoid paying taxes, there is nothing wrong with that, except perhaps ideological.
All right, let's go to our friends across the channel here. I'll begin with you, Andy Sylvester. What's going to be the political impact of all of this in this general election campaign situation that we're in?
Absolutely, we are 3 months away, and there will be an impact of this. The last couple of weeks have seen the newspapers packed with stories, and the Conservatives have been caught up in it because of the Stephen Green issue, but also because some of their donors, which again is transparent and open, have also been caught up in sort of various tax avoidance schemes. I think Craig is exactly right that the tenor of debate here is moving away from these kind of witch hunts. I don't think they're very popular anymore, frankly. And I think people are now keying onto the fact that politicians aren't fixing the system they have the power to fix. On a sort of wider political narrative, it doesn't suit the Conservatives well to be associated with this. They still have problems appealing to certain sectors of the population that look at tax avoidance and think, why don't I get a chance to do that? You know, I pay every month in my tax code and I don't earn enough to get accountants. From Labour's perspective, the Conservatives have done an exceptionally good job of turning fire on them because, of course, the allegations that Herve has brought to light, and thank goodness he has, and I'd echo calls for stronger whistleblower protection, they happened under Labour's watch in Westminster. So, frankly, it's been quite an unedifying scene the last couple of weeks, and it's only destroyed even more trust in Westminster, which was already struggling for its reputation.
Nicholas Wilson?
I'd like to tell you something about Stephen Green, and I think, if I may be so bold, when my story comes out, which it will in the next few weeks, this little snippet of information might bring Cameron down before the election.
Oh, you're whetting our appetite here.
Well, in connection with the thing I've been dealing with, this fraud thing, the Office of Fair Trading made an order against HFC Bank, which is a subsidiary of HSBC Bank, telling them to stop doing what it was that I was complaining about. I won't go into that, but the order was signed on the 17th of November 2010. On the 16th of November 2010, it was announced that Cameron was making Stephen Green a lord. But the OT order wasn't published on the 17th, it was just signed on the 17th. On the 22nd of November 2010, Stephen Green was introduced to the House of Lords. On the 22nd of November 2010, the Office of Fair Trading issued a press release, and the title of the press release was to do with charging orders. The thing I've been complaining about is something called collection charges. There was nothing in the press release about collection charges. Right at the bottom of the press release was a PDF attachment which contained the order that was made against HSBC Bank, and nobody picked it up. None of the media picked it up. I picked it up because I'm researching it. Nobody knows about it. So what happened was Cameron said, I'm going to make Green a lord. Has anybody got any dirt on HSBC that's going to embarrass me? Found out about this OFT order and got it buried.
And what's going to be the
website?
What's going to be Nicholas Wilson? What's going to be the impact on the general election?
Well, as I say, if this comes out and if it's picked up in the way I believe it should be, because everybody's saying, I'm coming to answer your question. I mean, everybody's saying Cameron knew about this tax thing before he made Green a lord. Well, I think this will just be the nail in the coffin. And I honestly think Cameron will have to go before May. But if he doesn't, I think there's no possibility that he will get in again. Or I hope so.
Craig Capitis.
If I may, can I tell you how this all started? It goes back to 1927. No.
You're going back far here.
If you want to understand why the fish in this barrel smells so bad, you need to know the history here. In fact, I would suggest there's really no other story we're seeing here out right now, and where you need to understand the history. It goes back to 1927, to Panama. A few years before, the United States instituted income tax. And the people who worked on the Panama Canal were fed up with having to pay tax to the United States when they lived somewhere else. So they went to the Panamanian government, and the Panamanian government enacted what was known as Law 32, which is still on the books. Law 32, in simple terms, allowed any foreigner to start a company down there based on the Delaware corporate model. Now, this, when I was last in Panama, was one of the country's biggest earners. In fact, it contributed more to GDP than the Panama Canal revenues. They got in trouble. And this was where there was an opportunity to change the system. They got into the trouble in the late 80s with Noriega, because Noriega was bringing in a lot of narco dollars to filter through the system, and the legitimate money ran out. They left. They went to other tax domiciles. When Noriega left, all that money came back in, and all the big banks. Now, right now, there's over 130 offshore banks in Panama. It employs over 15,000 jobs, I believe, like in Luxembourg and other offshore centers. This is what this country has to offer. This is how they make money. And the most important question to me for Herve is if he, on that list that he has, if he knows where these alleged tax avoiders or dodgers are actually domiciled. I would be surprised if that list actually stated whether these individuals were paying their legitimate taxes in the jurisdictions where they are required to. That's the first question that's going to be asked in any legal proceeding.
Herve Falciani?
Yes, just to answer that, a lot of more information are available on who was detaining what legal structure, where, of course, the structure was domiciliate and where the beneficiaries were declaring their tax residency. So all this is available, and one of of the important aspect of the subject I would like to highlight is that you have no efficient legal cooperation at the level of Europe. And of course, this is also right locally in Great Britain or in France, when some departments are in charge of part of one aspect of one investigation, they with a lot of difficulty, they can collaborate when they can collaborate with other departments to say.
Herve Falciani, let me ask you: do you think that with this being brought to light, there's going to be a bigger push now for tax harmonization between states?
I'm not sure this is possible. In a practical way, I really don't think it's possible to manage it globally. Public awareness, once more, it may be difficult to organize a way for NGO, for really independent authority to have access to what is ongoing inside, the companies. What the story is telling us is that without insiders, you don't exactly know what must be changed, what is ongoing. So to me, it's not that complex. It seems so simple that we don't want to stop on it. But this is enough. It's about history, impunity, from Platon in his book, second book of Republica, speaking about the myth of Gizes. It's the same, just help insider in a protected way share the valuable information they may offer to understand clearly what is important to change. And, even board of directors won't let things going in an unethical way.
All right, so
because, of course, of public awareness.
Plato gets the last word. Herve Falciani, I want to thank you for joining us today. Herve Falciani, the whistleblower in the Swiss Leaks scandal, joining us from an undisclosed location. Andy Sylvester of the Taxpayers Alliance in London, I want to thank as well. Nicholas Wilson for being with us from Hastings. Nicholas, I hope you will check in with us when you have more on your own personal tale. And Craig Capitis for being with us here.
Thank you.
Stay with us because our Media Watch segment is next.